FreeMMOStation.com.
Hey everybody, I'm Skyland Shore with FreeMMOStation, and today we're going to look at a MMORTS. This is going to be my first impression review on Games Tribal Wars 2. So Games.com Tribal Wars 2 is the sequel to what was rather a prominent figure within the early free-to-play MMORTS community or market. Anyways, my personal bias coming into this first impression is that I've played a lot of MMORTS, I've done a lot of first impressions, but I've never really carried my gameplay all the way to endgame. And my favorite experience that I've played so far is actually coming recently with Clash of Clans. So, with that bias in mind, guys, I can say that this game, at least a little bit, intrigued me. It was a little bit interesting, because it's got this really deep attack-defense structure, where all these different units have a lot of stats and math behind it. Yeah, it definitely involves a lot of math and planning for each endeavor. You gotta have defensive units, defensive structures, certain numbers of each, different things like churches, lots of units to produce all sorts of varying stats, which are affected by different factors, like what structures you have built in your defending city, like walls, or maybe if you own a church or a steeple in an area that you are attacking. Really, there's a lot of factors that go into everything, so you got to do a lot of planning. Definitely get those spreadsheets out. But overall, I found that the combat was really near non-existent. It's just really instantaneous. Like, your guys just go and attack, and then it says victory or loss. So you don't have any sort of board game components or any sort of minigame like that. And really, it's mostly comprised of atrocious gameplay. It's just the bigger army generally wins. And by bigger, I don't mean bigger numbers. It's just if you have better stats. Because there are a lot of different factors. You can't just throw lots of units at something. You do have to pick which units go. That's not very different from what we're used to in MMORTSs, as most of the strategy and gameplay of these kind of games is really meta. As in it's about growing a guild, growing a community, and trying to conquer the world rather than a solo play experience. So Tribal Wars 2 is pretty similar to, I would say, Game of War, which is a very popular game. It's also just kind of usual. It's actually kind of like a standard MMORTS. But it's also a sequel to what started like the standard MMORTS movement. So players start the game by following through a tutorial, usual. It's actually rather usual, and personally I expected, I guess, a little bit more of an expedited process for what's a sequel of a game, but found that not only did the tutorial feel a little bit redundant, but also the quest following the tutorial existed as actually like a second tutorial in disguise, and it really limits the player's creativity, like, right out of the gate. It also makes a kind of bad first impression, and it shows us that Tribal Wars 2 is going to be a game about linear progression, will almost certainly be about who has a bigger army rather than specialization of productions or uniquely organized defenses, something like that. In fact, really there's no choice in this game other than the fact that players must choose which units to produce first, who to attack, and which buildings to upgrade in what order, but in the end, it's all really going to just equate to the same thing. After the player is introduced to the game's mechanics, they're really left to their own devices, which essentially equates to logging in, producing units, attacking some cities, log out, rinse, repeat. In other Games.com's MMORTSs, Elvenar and Forge of Empires, there exists a mechanic to allow players a choice of certain goods to be produced. This means that the player can choose to set a very long production schedule, log in once a day maybe, collect and pillage, or they can actually set really short cycles and consistently play the game with little downtime, constantly attacking, constantly producing, and constantly changing around and managing their city. The risk exists that players could have their goods stolen if they weren't logged in to collect, but still, this is an element that made the management of the city at least a little bit fun. Yeah, the risk is, you can call that fun, and seems unacknowledged completely and entirely in Tribal Wars 2, where gameplay is really just incredibly much more stagnant. Really, the only way to break the stagnant nature of the game is with the cash shop, because everything is gated by time, and in this particular game, time is not short at all. Developing the city is rather boring as well. There's really no management required, so the true game feel, simply just logging in, tapping on the screen, and logging out. A significant amount of time needs to be allocated to the game to even really begin to understand its core concepts, and I can see that. I'm definitely over my head when I get into this game, but at the same time, I understand that it's going to take even longer to take advantage of those concepts, because it's a whole lot of math. Yes, you are going to need a lot of spreadsheets, and once you even understand the game, you're just going to be sitting there for a long time planning out your advances, planning out your army, and I guess most of the game is just not even playing it. It's just waiting and planning. MMORTSs are kind of known infamously for a few of these reasons, and Tribal Wars 2 really epitomizes all of them. Not only is the cash shop barren of any cosmetics, but instead of the usual production hastening items, produce unit quicker or instantly, we get straight up buffs to defending or attacking units. So this completely vanishes any doubt that this game was not pay to win. It's absolutely pay to win. Still, it is a free game, and it is possible for, I guess, any single person to build up a strong city. But like I mentioned earlier, this is not a single-player experience. Some MMORTSs have interesting characters to guide us on our journey, sometimes voice acting even, so a little bit of roleplay going on. Some actually have stories. Sometimes there's entire little events, PvE, cities we can attack, like Clash of Clans, but Tribal Wars 2 has none of that. There's no PvE element, there's no single-player element, and the only true way to experience the game is to join up or create a faction, and sadly, unlike Clash of Clans, which is really both popular and can be enjoyed alone, Tribal Wars 2 is completely reliant on its hardcore player base, which is devastatingly lacking in numbers. The game can also be played on mobile devices. Hey, that's pretty cool. And its UI actually works really well with the platform, and personally I think mobile devices are perfect for the MMORTS genre. And in my experience, this game actually performs really good, considering that the browser component sometimes was, I don't know, really chuggy. It lacked really, I guess, polish, and it has like no good animations. The art really isn't as good as it could be as well. This is kind of sad considering how low impact the art and animations are for both the browser and mobile, so it's kind of weird that the browser doesn't run that well, and sometimes the mobile does crash, sometimes it runs good. It's really just, I don't know, it just seems like it lacks polish. Not the worst art I've ever seen, but definitely I do want to mention that its animations were really far and in between, extremely dull. If I'm just going to be looking at a stagnant scene, I really want to see people moving around, armies shuffling about. Maybe I would like to see the river actually flowing. So yeah, there's really no uniquity between the different cities, like we would see in Sparta War of Empires, where the cash shop you can actually have different skins, or namely Clash of Clans, where the layout of the city not just is customizable, but actually relevant to the defense of the city, so somebody's city can actually be really interesting to look at because it shows their defenses. And I've played a fair amount of MMORTSs lately, especially from enogames.com, and I can say with confidence that Tribal Wars 2 is the weakest link. I found Elvenar more interesting because of its board game-esque battle sequences and actual town building, or even Forge of Empires, which has infinitely more depth and content with its civilization-esque town progression. Tribal Wars 2 looks good as a, I guess, Facebook banner, but all the real mechanics, game feel, pretty much when you actually get into the game, you realize what would make it a great MMORTS is completely rendered useless by the lack of true content. Alright guys, so to be fair, I wanted to do like a post-mortem kind of post-first impression kind of thing. I played it for a little bit more, and there's some clarification that I would like to dish out right now. So now with all that I've said, guys, right, after a few more hours of playing, I found out that they actually have a much more simplified version of Elvenar's or Forge of Empires production system. So a menu pops up whenever you log in to see your current production rate and to choose what product you want to make, but in the end, I still feel kind of justified saying what I said because it's not as fun or interactive as previous games. But it, it kind of does still exist. I think it's kind of similar to a lot of mechanics that I said were missing in this game. They're not entirely missing, they're just extremely watered down and really basic elements. Also, my complaint about the tutorial really only halfway stands, as the tutorial can be skipped, and the starting period can be quickly expedited by using the gold that's allocated to the new player at the start. However, I personally feel like you should not need to have to spend gold. You should not have to be allocated gold in order to make the starter experience fun and fast to actually get into the game. And also the quest lines. Whenever you're actually doing the quest lines after the tutorial, the game basically plays itself. You're just there clicking. Yeah, one thing that was not mentioned, though, in my first impression was the fact that cities can actually grow. So as your city grows, and I guess this is kind of to be expected, but it does evolve. It does actually start to look like a real kingdom as you progress through the game. So you start out with little wooden huts, and then you grow up to castles. And apparently you can own multiple towns and cities, though I haven't seen this myself at all. I really have no idea how it works. It can also be stated that the players should strategically conquer areas because apparently certain areas have more or less of certain resources, but in the end, the map aesthetically looks the same to me. So I'll admit that my first impression might be a little bit harsh, but not only does this genre really not lend itself well to first impressions, but this game in particular really focuses on endgame. So if you can start this game with a group of friends, or if you have a lot of patience, it might just be a great time. Maybe, but then again, it is a little bit pay to win. But I think as a solo player, you're going to find it really hard to start. It's a little bit of a tragedy, but that's how I feel. That's my first impressions after all. If you guys play Tribal Wars 2 and would love to correct me, you know what, go ahead, don't flame, but let's go ahead in the comments. Let's have a nice little discussion there if you would like to. And please like and subscribe if you want to keep seeing more first impressions. As always, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you again later.